Hello, this is Mr. Wolf, and we are continuing to read Chains by Laurie, Halse, Anderson, and we are on to Chapter 5. Wednesday, May 29th, 1776. The inhabitants of New York are in general brisk and lively. It rather hurts the European eye to see so many slaves upon the streets. There are computed between 26 and 30,000 inhabitants. The slaves makes at least a fifth part of that number. Letter written by Patrick Morobert, a Scotsman visiting New York. The Hartshorn docked in New York the next morning, just after a sailor brought down some old biscuits for our breakfast. I picked out the worms and tossed them through the porthole, then gave the biscuits to Ruth. Madame Lockton's voice rose above the shouting sailors. "Bring those girls up," she said. A fellow missing most of his teeth stuck his head down the hatchway and waved us over to the ladder. We climbed up, shading our eyes against the bright light of day. Men of all types and colors swarmed the deck, carrying casks and chests down the gangplank, scurrying up the rigging to tend to the sails, unloading gear, loading gear, and making me feel very small and in the way. Ruth stood at my side and stared so hard her thumb fell out of her mouth. The ship was tied up at a long dock, one of many that jutted into the river. The sun sparkled off the water so strong I had to shade my eyes. Tall houses of brick and stone faced us, with rows upon rows of windows looking down at the street. They reached higher than the oldest tree back home. There were smaller buildings, too, all crowded shoulder to shoulder, with no room for a feather to pass betwixt them. We arrived soon after a heavy rain. Soldiers splashed through the glittering puddles, toting wood, emptying wagons, carrying buckets hither and fro, and standing about on corners, conversating with each other. Some wore uniforms and carried long muskets. Others, in homespun clothes, dragged fence posts to a barricade. There were ordinary people, too. Maids with baskets over their arms moving into and out of the shops, and cartmen pushing their barrows over the cobblestones, calling out to each other and yelling at the dogs in their way. The working people were dressed muchly as we did out in the country, but there were a few gentry who stuck out of the crowd like peacocks wandering in a chicken pen. Some of the working folk were black. In truth, I had never seen so many of us in one place, not even at burials. A wagon drawn by two thick-necked horses stopped just beyond the end of the dock. Not far behind it came a beautiful carriage, drawn by two pale gold stallions, and driven by a stout man in livery, with a three-cornered hat on his head. He clucked to the horses to walk on until they stopped behind the first wagon. The toothless sailor approached us again and pointed down to the dock where the crates and casks stamped Lockton and Foot had been stacked. "That's where you belong. Don't wander off, or one of the soldiers will shoot you dead." He laughed as he walked down the swaying plank. We followed with tiny steps, Ruth's hand in mine. As I stepped onto the solid dock, I stumbled. "There you are!" exclaimed Madame Lockton, coming around the stacks of crates. "Be careful with that," she said to two deckhands carrying a fine walnut chest. "That goes on the back of the carriage, not to the warehouse." The men nodded and carried the chest toward the beautiful carriage with the golden horses at the end of the dock. "Pretty horses," Ruth said. A soldier at the end of the dock picked up his musket and stopped the two men carrying the walnut chest. There was a brief argument. Then the sailors returned, still carrying their burden. "What is this?" Madame asked as they set the chest at her feet. "I told you to put that on the carriage." "Beggin' your pardon, ma'am," the sailor said, "but them fellas say all cargo has to be inspected at the wharf before it enters the city. Order of some committee what's in charge here.
Inspected? She lifted her chin. Those are my personal belongings. They will not be inspected by anyone. I do not permit it.
Master Lockton had been half following the turn of events while supervising the unloading. As his wife's voice rose, he hurried to join her. "Now, dear," he said, "I told you there would be some inconveniences. We must be accommodating. Look, there's Charles. He'll straighten this out." A second wagon had pulled up next to the first. A round, short man rolled off of it and bustled up to the Locktons.
"What are you doing here?"
he demanded the round man.
"You shouldn't have come back."
"Lower your voice, Charles," Lockton said. Where are the men I instructed you to bring?" The round man pulled a handkerchief out of his waistcoat pocket and wiped his face.
"Washington's men took them all to work in the blasted fortifications. Oh, double blast. Look, there, Bellingham."
An official-looking man in a somber black coat had stepped out of the building across the street and was striding toward our little group, walking stick in hand. He was followed by a thin fellow carrying a book as big as Ruth. Behind him walked a slave boy about my height, whose arms were weighted down with a wooden contraption and a small case with a rope handle. The boy wore a floppy red hat, his shirt sleeves rolled up to the elbow, the blue breeches of a sailor, and a pair of dusty boots.
"Bellingham is eager to arrest you,"
Charles quietly told Master Lockton.
"I told you you were still unsafe. You should have waited."
"Anne?" Lockton fixed his eyes intently on his wife. "Do not fail me." She gave a little nod.
"You have a plan?"
Charles asked. "Everything is in order," Lockton said.
"Hello, Lockton,"
Bellingham called, waving his walking stick.
"Come, join us, friend."
3 more soldiers appeared and lined up a few paces behind him. "Smile, everyone," Lockton commanded through clenched teeth. "Pretend to be happy rebels." The Locktons and Charles walked to the land end at the dock. Ruth and me followed a few steps behind, little mice trailing behind dogs that were fixing for a fight. The boy at the end, in the red hat, set down the case and fiddled with the strange wooden thing. It was actually 2 strange wooden things, a folding desk and a small stool. After he set up both of them, the thin fellow laid the book on the desk, opened it to a blank page, and perched on the rickety stool. The boy opened the case and took out a bottle of ink and a quill, which he set next to the book. He closed and latched the case, then stepped back and put his hands behind his back, eyes ahead like he was a soldier too.
"Good day, Charles."
Bellingham inclined his head toward Madam.
"Mrs. Lockton?"
Ruth started to raise her hand to wave to the man, but I grabbed it and held it down.
"Mr. Bellingham," Madam replied, "how fares your good wife?"
"Happy that summer is nearly here. You know that she hates the cold."
"Please tell Lorna I shall call her as soon as we are settled,"
Madam said.
"Very good,"
Bellingham said.
"We thought you were in London, Elihu."
"London? Never!"
exclaimed Lockton. "England offers nothing but taxes, stamps, and bloodshed."
"How odd. Word from Boston is that you still lick the king's boots."
Madam drew in her breath sharply, but said nothing. "Why do you insult me, sir?"
"We are at war, sir,"
Bellingham said in a voice that all could hear. Several of the dock workers put down their burdens and stood up straight.
"Insults are the least of my concern. I'm more worried about the British invasion."
Lockton shrugged. "I am a merchant with cargo to sell," Search my crates if you wish. Search my entire ship. You won't find the British fleet, I promise. Those yellow-bellied cowards have sailed for Canada. Bellingham took 2 steps and stood a fingertip away from Lockton. He lowered his voice. I don't have time for your games. The Committee of Safety suspects you a Tory, in cahoots with Governor Tryon. You've come home to fight us who strive for freedom and liberty. All work on the ship stopped. The air had suddenly grown warm. I glanced sideways. The soldiers guarding the crates had picked up their guns. The clerk at the desk was the only one who seemed unrattled. He opened the ink bottle, dipped his pen, and scratched something across the blank page. I caught the boy behind the clerk, sparing a quick look at Ruth and me. His eyes were dark gray, the color of sea during a storm. Freedom and liberty have many meanings, Lockton finally said. Am I free to return to my home? Shall I be at liberty from the improper meddling of your committee? Bellingham held his position a moment longer. Then he took one long step back. Search the cargo, he commanded the soldiers, who laid down their weapons and picked up crowbars. Very well, Lockton said. Am I under arrest? Not until I find something, said Bellingham. Then I'm leaving. My wife is exhausted and needs me to accompany her home. Charles will stay and supervise. The round man sputtered twice, but didn't say a word. Enjoy your homecoming, Bellingham said. It may be short. The soldiers had started to go through the crates and call out the contents, the clerk writing down the details in his big book. Lockton motioned with his elbow again. Come, dear, he said firmly. Madam refused to move.
We cannot leave without my chest.
Now, wife, he said, it will be sent along.
It travels with me,
Madam said crisply.
Master Bellingham.
Bellingham bent over the clerk's inventory book, looked up. Ma'am?
Does your battle for liberty entitle you to search through the private linens of a lady?
The doc fell silent again. It was one thing for a gentleman to threaten another with arrest. The topic of ladies' linens was delicate. Bellingham cleared his throat and stood up straight. Well, the rules.
Do I gather, sir, from your hesitation, that you are unsure of the etiquette involved? Perhaps you lack the proper authority.
She carefully set herself on the walnut chest in question. Oh, no, Anne, please, Lockton groaned. Do not do this, my dear. Madam ignored him.
I demand that Mr. Bellingham write to his Congress in Philadelphia if they will give permission for common soldiers to rifle through my personal goods. Then I will surrender. Until the letter arrives, I shan't move. I shall guard my dignity day and night.
Charles shifted nervously from foot to foot. Lockton pinched the space where his nose met his forehead. The soldiers studied the tips of their boots. Bellingham muttered something impolite, and the boys standing behind the clerk fought hard not to smile. My own lips twitched. A woman defending her underclothes from a battalion of soldiers was comical. I didn't dare to laugh, of course. But Ruth did. She giggled, a sound like a small silver bell. A bell tolling disaster. Madame Lockton flew off the chest and pointed her finger at us.
Which one of you made that noise?
Her face flushed with rage, her eyes darting back and forth between us. I did, ma'am, I quickly lied. The smile on Ruth's face faded as she figured that something bad was unfolding. Crack! Lightning struck from a blue sky. Madame slapped my face so hard it near threw me to the ground. The sound echoed off the stone-faced buildings. Ruth grabbed at my skirts and helped me stand straight again. She was confused, but kept her mouth closed, thank heavens. My cheek burned, but I fought back the hot tears and tried to swallow the lump in my throat. No one had ever slapped my face like that. Not once in my whole life. Better me than Ruth. Better me than Ruth. Madame sat back on the wooden chest and looked calmly at her husband, as if nothing had happened. The soldiers all went about their business, one of them whistling. The only person who looked my way was the boy in the red hat. He kept his features froze in a mask, but he swallowed hard. Lockton shrugged. You see, Bellingham, I don't have time for your war. I have my own battles in my own household. Bellingham sighed and waved at the soldiers closest to where Madame sat.
You there, carry the lady's belongings to her carriage.
He did not mention me. I was already forgotten, dismissed, though the outline of her palm and fingers still burned on my skin. For an instant, I saw myself pushing her off the dock into the water below. But I blinked twice, and the vision vanished. I took Ruth by the hand. Madame rose gracefully.
Thank you, Mr. Bellingham.
Lockton offered his arm to his wife, and this time she took it. Bellingham lifted his hat as they passed. Ruth and me trailed close behind. As we approached the carriage, the driver jumped down and opened the door. Lockton helped his wife as she stepped up and settled on the padded seat. "Well done, my dear," he murmured. "Well done indeed." Madame blushed.
"'Twas all your doing." She smoothed her skirts. "Put the little girl up with the driver."
"What about the older one?" She leaned forward to stare at me, standing just behind the master.
"Send that one to fetch some clean water. I doubt Becky has had word of our arrival yet."
Lockton looked puzzled. How will she know where to find the pump? Or how to get home, for that matter?
"Charles will find someone to assist her."
I'll take her, sir." Lockton turned around. The boy had removed his hat and bowed politely. "I'm Curzon, sir. Master Bellingham's boy. My master needs me to fetch new quills up Vanderwater Street. I could show your girl the way." The driver and the soldier had finished strapping the walnut chest to the back of the carriage. The driver spoke gently to Ruth and took her by the hand to meet the horses. She giggled and went eagerly. Lockton studied the boy, then looked over to Bellingham, who was inspecting one of the opened crates with a nervous Charles by his side.
"Excellent idea,"
said Madame. "You know where our house is?" Lockton asked Curzon. "One of the proudest in the city, sir," the boy answered, as he put his hat back on his head. With him standing this close, I could see the gold ring in his right ear, like a pirate's, and a long, thin scar that ran along the left side of his chin. "South side of Wall Street, just past Smith." Lockton grunted and glared at me. "Be quick on your business. No dawdling, understand?" I curtsied, bewildered at the speed of it all. Yesterday, I had been aboard a ship. The day before that, sold in a tavern. The day before that, I woke up in my own bed and watched an old woman die. My belly ached again, as if it were still at sea and the waves were throwing me off balance. "Well?" Lockton demanded. "Yes, sir," I whispered. He looked at his wife. "This one might be simple, too." He climbed into the carriage, closed the door, and rapped the ceiling with his knuckles. "Go, driver!" The carriage rolled away, Ruth sitting up straight with a big grin, the golden horses tossing their manes, hooves flashing in the sunshine. She waved to me as they drove away. I bent down, dipped my fingers in a puddle, and scrubbed the spot where the woman hit me. And that is the end of chapter 5. Thank you for following along, and I'll see you again soon.